Testing. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing. Okay. Bend it a little more. Okay. That's look right? These things always move on me. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. All right. Are we ready to begin? All right. We had some technical difficulties, but it didn't put us back too much. We managed to solve them, fortunately. So, all right, so welcome everybody to the evening meeting, and like I said, this will be totally different than not only what we did last time with our two presentations, but of everything that we've done today. It will, is very different than what I do. I wanted to preface this with a couple things. I'm assuming now we're live streaming at this point, assuming that it's running. Okay. At the end of our last meeting, we were talking about fundamentals of Christian education. I want to make sure that is stated which page it is, because I looked it up. It is Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 475 and onwards. And so for those watching at home, you wanted to get that reference as well. And so that is the chapter that she deals with the political involvement in that particular case, dealing with our schools and pastors. But in general, that's basically her clear political statement on whether or not we should be involved in party politics. So take a look at that, Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 475 and onwards. It's a fairly large chapter. All right, so that's the first thing. Second thing, I've been here twice, and so the first time I came here, I did a presentation on the blind watchmaker. And basically that was going through the animal world and basically looking at various animals, both in their physical structures and in their mental behavior, to see whether or not the evidence they give us supports our view of creation or whether it supports the evolutionist view of random chance. And basically, of course, we found that the scientific evidence from the animal world is overwhelmingly, conclusively, the proof that creation is the only one that makes any sense. There's no way that evolutionary theory works when we actually look at the animals that are doing things and living their lives and existing. In fact, their evidence is overwhelmingly toward the Creator that made them. Last year, when we came, we did a presentation on little-known miracles of God's creation, which was basically looking at the gifts that God has given to the animal world, because not only does it prove that creation is true, but it proves our God is great, spectacular. The way He makes animals is so amazing. The gifts He has given to animals is so incredible that every animal we look at has something special that points us back to God and gives us a beautiful understanding that He is just the most incredible creator that you could ever imagine. So that's what we did last time. So we looked at animals both from the anti-evolution standpoint as well as the pro-God standpoint. And those are the kind of the two sides of the same coin. This time we're going to do something completely different. And we're going to get much more practical, much more into our daily walk with Jesus, because tonight is about our spiritual life and how it relates to the issues of animals. And so we're going to go deep into the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy to see what it has to tell us in these areas. Before I do that, however, I'm going to give you something special, a little bonus that I decided to do just because this was fun. Last year, when we came here, it was at the beginning of June, sometime like that. It was at the beginning of summer for sure. I don't remember the exact date. And it was quite different weather conditions than we have right now. It had been a month of rain. It had flooded just about every area of the Dallas area, Fort Worth area. It was just nothing but inundation of water. And we were camped up at a Army Corps of Engineer campground on the outskirts of town. And it was just the entire back area of the campground between the sites was basically underwater. And so there was like a marsh, and the grass had grown. They hadn't been able to cut it. And so it was just this wetland marsh that was in that particular habitat. And so this is what I wanted to show you. Now we have narrow-mouthed toad here on the screen. Now what is that? Well, this is a narrow-mouthed toad. It is a very, very tiny amphibian. From the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail is a grand total of 1 inch. So this is a very, very, very tiny little guy. He's called a narrow-mouthed toad because his mouth is very small, and he has actually got a very tiny little mouth at the point of his, in front of his mouth. And he has a normal frog toad shape. He's called a toad, but he's kind of halfway in between a frog and a toad. It's a unique group of amphibians that are basically completely unlike others in terms of their physical structure. And this right here is called the Great Plains narrow-mouthed toad. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because this picture was taken last year at that Army Corps of Engineer campground in that wet, flooded field. Because it was so wet, it was their breeding time, and they were all coming together and calling. Normally they live underneath a rock. Normally they live underneath a log where an ant colony is found. So if you turn over a rock or log and you find an ant colony, look around because you might be finding one of those little tiny toads. And so you always see these guys with that because that is their food. They're going to be eating the larva, and that's their main food, and ants are very tiny, and so you don't need a big mouth to eat it, and so that's why they have a small mouth, because they don't need a bigger mouth than that. Now, again, here's another picture taken last year. He is sitting, floating in the water, looking up at us, and this is where he was calling. Now, normally this is extremely hard to find. When they're calling, they come out from underneath their rocks and logs, and they come to a central marshy habitat like this, where there's a lot of flooded area, and then they will start to give their courtship calls and tell everybody what's going on, come and find me. And so that's great for the female. She knows exactly where to come, and she homes in on the little call that the male is making. But in terms of me trying to find them, it is a very difficult thing to do because they're still only an inch long, and they're out in the swamp or out in the marsh and normally hidden from view and tucked away, and they can throw their voice so it sounds like he's over here, but he's actually over here, and then you have a really difficult time to find. So this is how we were able to be really lucky, because they were in a place where we could just walk around until we found them. They weren't hidden behind a swamp tree where we couldn't get access to them. So this was really a great opportunity to be able to find them in this way. And here's the sound that they make. That is the beautiful love song of the narrow-mouthed toad. And the females go and find that call because that's what they're looking for. Now here's what's interesting about narrow-mouthed toads. So they're looking for the ants to eat, and of course the larva can't fight back, but the adult ants can. They can bite. Well, for some reason, these guys do not seem to be bothered. Their skin is kind of impenetrable to the bites and stings, and so the ants crawl all over them, and they can't harm them, and so they're not bothering these little toads. But here's the interesting thing. They are bothered when the ants bother their eyes. They're very sensitive eyes, and so they don't like it when the ants are coming at their eyes because that can be dangerous to their eyes. So they have to protect their eyes. Now here's what God has given to this little group of amphibians. And again, all narrow-mouthed toads have exactly this structure, and only they have it, and there's only a few species of them. You notice that there's a weird line running behind his head all the way across. And only recently, in the last few decades, did scientists figure out what that line was for. It is actually a roll of skin where the skin is rolled up upon itself, and there's little tiny muscles in there. And when the ant is attacked on his eyes when the toad is attacked by an ant on his eyes, he is able to pull that roll of skin forward over his eyes and keep the ants from biting his eyes. It's like a windshield wiper, completely able to knock the ants off of his face and keep his very sensitive eyes from being attacked. That is a little-known miracle of God's creation. God gave to this little group a roll of skin on the back of their head that allows them to be able to protect themselves from the one part of their body that they are sensitive from their food source in this way. And so these guys right here are the eastern narrow-mouthed toad, but all the brown ones that we've been seeing here are the Great Plains one, and we got all of those pictures last year here. So I just wanted to share that with you as a special treat of your backyard that you probably have never seen or heard, but it is something that is in your area and is quite special. Other than this, I've only ever seen these guys one time, and that was up in Oklahoma. I've seen the eastern species several times, so it is something you don't come across every day. So that's a little bonus. That's something that you just got extra. And now we're going to go into our main presentation. Animals, Ethics, and Christianity. Now, tonight's program is going to be very challenging. It's going to be showing you things that maybe you haven't thought about before in ways that you hadn't thought about. And it is also a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier, standing for an issue without standing for a political side. Because what we're going to be talking about is not part of a political agenda. This is about truth. This is about error. This is about right and wrong. And so what we're going to be looking at tonight is about deciding what the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy have to tell us in this very important area. So one of the most deeply held beliefs of mankind is that human beings are the absolute masters of the earth. In our society, many of our practices impact upon the lives of animals in a variety of ways. Now, what is our duty as Adventist Christians to the animals around us? Is there any debt we owe to them, or are we free to ignore the results of our actions? This presentation tonight is an attempt to answer that question from the Word of God. Developing Christ's character in us. Now, there is a text that we as Adventists are very familiar with. In Matthew 5:48, Jesus tells his disciples, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Now, this means that we need to have the character of God represented in us. God's motives, values, and way of dealing with us, as shown through the life of Christ, are to be our motives, values, and way of dealing with others. The importance of having this experience is found in Christ's Object Lesson, page 69. When the character of Christ shall be perfectly reproduced in his people, then he will come to claim them as his own. Everything we do should be measured by what would Christ do in the same circumstances. The character we develop now will be taken unchanged into heaven. Only the body will be made new. It doesn't matter if a person dies and is resurrected or is amongst the final generation that lives to see his coming. All will take the character they've developed here straight to heaven. We are to make sure every effort to live on earth as we will live in heaven. Every right principle, every truth learned in an earthly school will advance us just that much in the heavenly school. Maranatha, page 327. So it becomes our duty to discover the right principles that have been revealed to us to learn. We will focus on one of those principles tonight. What God meant by dominion. We begin with one of the more famous texts of the Bible. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." Genesis 1:26. This is the text always used to show that whatever we do to the animal creation is accepted and approved by God. It is the divine mandate that justifies any action that we choose. But what is the principle being given here? Are we completely sure that we have applied this verse correctly? The answer to that question will determine how we apply the principle, the dominion principle, to our daily lives. Now we're going to go to Colossians 1:16. "For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him." Now this is talking about Christ here in Colossians. Everything in this world has been created for Christ, including ourselves and everything around us. All the animals were created for Christ as well. As Psalms 50 verses 10 to 11 shows, God claims all animal life as his own. "For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine." We cannot own what belongs to God. The most that we can be are caretakers. Now, in Genesis, Christ did not give us ownership of the animals. He gave us dominion. So, what does the word dominion mean? To find out, we need to understand what it meant to the original writers and readers of the Bible. In 1 Kings 4, verses 24 to 25, we have the same Hebrew word meaning dominion that we had in Genesis. For he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on all sides round about him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree. Now, King Solomon's dominion here sounds like a very positive thing. Sounds very good at this point. Further, Psalm 72 is a model of how a good king is to rule over his subjects. He shall judge thy people with righteousness, and thy poor with judgment. The mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. He shall judge the poor of the people. He shall save the children of the needy, and shall break in pieces the oppressor. He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass, as showers that water the earth. In his days shall all the righteous flourish, and the abundance of peace, so long as the moon endureth. Now here's the key verse. He shall have dominion also from sea to sea, and from the river unto the ends of the earth. For he shall deliver the needy when he crieth, the poor also, and him that hath no helper. He shall spare the poor and the needy, and shall save the souls of the needy. He shall redeem their soul from deceit and violence, and precious shall their blood be in his sight. And he shall live, and to him shall be given of the gold of Sheba. Prayer also shall be given unto him continually, and daily shall he be praised. His name shall endure forever. His name shall be continued as long as the sun, and men shall be blessed in him. All nations shall call him blessed. Now, I'm sure that we could all agree that King behaving in this manner is doing everything as he should. He has dominion over his subjects, and they praise him for it. He is blessed. This is a beautiful description of what dominion means to God. Yet there's more to it than that. Verse 8 is repeated in Zechariah 9, verse 10, as a prophecy of the Messiah. Christ is to have dominion from sea to sea, from the river unto the ends of the earth. As David says in Psalm 103, verse 19, the Lord hath prepared his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom ruleth over all. Jesus is our king. He has dominion over humans, just as we have dominion over the animals. To understand how we should exercise our dominion responsibility, we must first understand how he exercises his dominion responsibility. This is the dominion principle. God is over us in the same way that we are over the animals. If we can understand this principle, we will have gone a long way to understanding our role in God's creation. Now, we've seen in Psalms how Christ exercises his dominion. In Genesis 1, we see our dominion responsibility. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. Now, what was included in Adam's dominion? One glaring thing not included is the eating of animals. Verse 29 makes that very clear. Adam's duty is illuminated further in Genesis 2, verse 15. And the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. Adam was the caretaker of Eden. He had a responsibility to it. He was God's servant taking care of God's creations. Adam's dominion was no tyrannical, dictatorial exploitation. This is the beauty of God's dominion, that those he has dominion over praise him for it. Now, doesn't Adam's dominion here sound a lot like the dominion of Psalm 72? This is God's dominion. This is how it is in heaven, in Eden, and the new earth. Upward look, page 291. Our work in this world is to reveal the pure principles that are current in heaven. Satan's counterfeit. But like every other principle of God, Satan creates his own counterfeits. He has warped our concept of God's dominion over us. God is said to be a tyrant, a predestining God that decides who will be saved and who will burn in hell. Satan sends natural disasters to wipe out homes and lives and has convinced us to call them acts of God. When children die of starvation and when friends die from disease or accidents, we are told to lay the blame on God. Now, all of this is Satan's version of God's dominion. And of course, there is Satan's version of our dominion over the animals. Satan's dominion versus God's dominion. To find out Satan's dominion, we should first discover God's dominion. Whatever doesn't belong in God's dominion must fall into Satan's dominion. If we are not following God's plan, we are following Satan's plan. The principles of taking life. So, what is God's plan? God's dominion. Once sin entered the earth, humans were granted permission to kill animals. So our question is, when is it acceptable to take an animal's life? Under what circumstances is it acceptable to do so? To answer that question, we must first look at God's example with us. When is it acceptable to take a human life? Under what circumstances did God allow or direct the taking of human life? Number one, capital punishment. Spelled out in the Old Testament is a detailed list of crimes that warranted the death penalty under Israel's theocracy. Number two, self-defense. This applied not only to an individual being attacked by another human individual, but also when Israel was being attacked by other nations around them. Number three, God's command. Israel was to destroy all the Canaanites out of the land, without exception. When Achan was stoned, his entire family and household were stoned also, even though it was Achan who had committed this crime. There are many instances where God himself or his human agents killed people at God's command. Now, these three categories cover the killing of humans allowed by God in Scripture. Now we can discover when it is allowed to kill an animal. The first category for humans, capital punishment, does not apply to the animals. Since animals cannot know the law of God, they are incapable of knowingly breaking it. So the categories for animals are as follows. Self-defense. If an animal attacks a human, it is acceptable to kill that particular animal. An obvious example of this is David and the lion. But this cannot be extended to the entire species, only to the individual animal involved in the attack. This is the same as with humans. We can kill a human in self-defense, but that does not mean we can kill that person's relatives or friends. To deliberately kill an innocent human who has committed no attack is murder. Likewise, we never have biblical permission to kill a predator, such as a bear, cougar, or snake, that has not attacked people or our pets. Preemptive killing is not self-defense, but instead is Satan's way. God's command. Two main areas are included in this. The first is animal sacrifice. The second is the killing of animals for food. Immediately after sin, God commanded sacrifice to begin. In Leviticus, they were structured and organized. All pointed to Christ's perfect sacrifice and were intended to bring home to man the horror of sin, the vileness of every act committed against God's way. But what God commands he can also fulfill. When type met antitype, the sacrificial system reached its completion, and Jesus made it clear that all sacrifice was to end. So now one area where God commanded man to kill animals has been repealed. The killing of animals for food started after the flood in Genesis 9. Up until that point, at no point did God give permission for people to take the lives of animals for food. People did, and it was one of the things that led to the destruction of earth because of the bloodthirstiness of people before the flood. And only after the flood was permission given by God's people to do so. But it is important to note that key restrictions are given to Noah at the exact same time. The clean animals only are to be eaten, as specifically listed later in the Levitical law. But the more important restriction is in verse 4 of Genesis 9. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. No blood was ever to be eaten. The Levitical law spelled it out in detail in Leviticus 17. Now, is this command obeyed by anyone today other than Orthodox Jews? Ezekiel 33 lists the eating of blood with idol worship, murder, and adultery as Israel's chief sins. This indicates how serious God considers this sin. Now, some people claim that this restriction was part of the ceremonial law and therefore was done away with at Christ's death. But as we've seen, the prohibition against consuming any blood preceded the Levitical law by approximately 1,000 years. It continued to be the rule for the growing Christian church after the death of Christ and was stated in official church policy. In Acts 15, verses 28 to 29, when they made a group decision as to what the church would hold of the original Levitical law, they said this: "For it seemed good to the Holy Ghost and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that ye abstain from meats offered to idols, and from blood, and from things strangled, and from fornication, from which if ye keep yourselves, ye shall do well." Now, this policy was supported later on in Acts 21:25. So far from being abandoned at the cross, the mandate never to eat blood was continued as a vital aspect of the Christian life. It was only during the Dark Ages that apostate Christianity abandoned this principle, as they ignored so many other of the Bible teachings. Now, if the Christian basis for the permission to eat meat is from the Bible, then why don't Christians follow the entire mandate? Well, obviously because the bloodless meat is tasteless meat. All the flavor is in the blood. This is why Jewish ones who do their kosher meat have to season it so strongly in order to compensate for the lack of the blood that has been taken out. This suggests that the ability of the post-flood humans to eat animals was intended to be a necessity and not a pleasure. Ellen White confirms this on Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 373. But on the same page, she also gives a second reason why for God allowing them to eat meat. God saw that the ways of man were corrupt, and he permitted that long-lived race to eat animal food to shorten their sinful lives. Soon after the flood, the race began to rapidly decrease in size and in length of years. So, in effect, it was a discipline for the race's wickedness that meat eating was allowed. Those today who argue for meat eating because the Bible allows it are in fact arguing for the opportunity to be disciplined and to have their lives shortened. Now, if meat eating was a necessity, that leads to the conclusion that when it was no longer a necessity, it would no longer be done. Now, this is many cultures in all ages have had a justifiable need for meat when better food was unavailable. That has been true throughout history and is still true in some parts of the world today. But does that apply to us today in the United States and other developed nations where every conceivable food is available? A century ago, Ellen White extensively detailed how meat was not only unnecessary, but harmful. We are in the last days, the final atonement, when we should be striving to rid ourselves of the world's attractions. As God gives light to his people, he expects them to utilize it. After the fall, the eating of flesh was allowed, in order to shorten the period of the existence of the long-lived race. It was allowed because of the hardness of the hearts of men. Spalding and McGann Collection, page 46. As we move on through the 21st century, God has clearly spelled out a better way. Will we continue to harden our hearts to his will? The principles of causing suffering. The next question we must examine is, when is it acceptable to cause an animal to suffer? Not when we can kill them, but when we can cause them to suffer. Again, we must examine when humans can be made to suffer under God's dominion. Number 1, discipline. Spanking a child, locking up a thief, giving leprosy to Elisha's servant, wandering 40 years in the wilderness, letting cause and effect run its course in all its myriad forms. All are forms of discipline. Number 2, to save life. An example is an operation that causes pain but saves the person's life, removing a gangrenous limb. Eating broccoli, one of the worst forms of torture ever invented. So then what about the animals? Now, first of all, there are many in our society who say that the animals suffer much less than we do, or even not at all. Why would that be, we ask? Well, because they are different from us, the answer is given. But what really separates humans and animals? What is the defining difference that makes us different? Ask an evolutionist that question 50 years ago, and he would have glibly rattled off a whole list of differences that they held that divide human beings from animals. Ask that same evolutionist that same question today, and they will scratch their heads and try desperately to come up with something, indeed anything, that separates humans and animals. Every difference evolutionists hold has crumbled in the face of modern discoveries of animal behavior. Tool use, modifying of the surroundings, existence of culture, art, language, all are now known to exist in animals. So, forget the evolutionists. Ask a mainline Christian what the difference is between humans and animals. They have an answer, and their answer hasn't changed for over 1,000 years. Animals do not have a soul. Human beings have an immortal soul. Animals do not. Adventists have discarded the concept of the immortal soul, but unfortunately, the attitude toward animals that goes with it has been retained. Now, this is very important. Let's take a closer look at what is the definition of a soul. How was man created? Genesis 2, verse 7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Take away the breath of life, and man ceases to be a living soul. Man does not have a soul, he is a soul. That is a key difference in Adventist theology to the world. Everybody always says, you have a soul. That is totally not biblical. Human beings are a living soul. Now, the Hebrew word translated here is nephesh. That's what the word means for soul. So now, what about the animals? In Genesis 7, verse 15, the animals entered Noah's ark. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. So, animals also have the breath of life. Does that mean they are living souls? Let's find out. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature, nephesh, that hath life. And let the earth bring forth the living creature, nephesh, after his kind. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, nephesh, that was the name thereof. Throughout the Old Testament, the word nephesh is used interchangeably for both humans and animals. We find the same in the New Testament, such as when the plagues are falling, Revelation 16, verse 3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. Just as man has the breath of life, and therefore is a living soul, so do animals have the breath of life, and therefore are living souls. Scripture defines animals as souls identical to us, and any attempts to degrade animals as soulless are unbiblical. The only defining difference that is found in the Bible that sets humans apart from animals is having the image of God. Now that, in its most important aspect, means we have a conscience and can choose between right and wrong. That is the only thing that we can claim that the animals do not have. But in terms of pain and suffering, there is no difference. We feel pain because we are vertebrates with a nervous system, and all vertebrate animals feel pain and have the same nervous system and capacity to feel pain. Our vertebrae protects our spinal cord. From our spinal cord radiates nerves that lead to every part of our body. The free nerve endings are what register pain, heat, and cold. All animals with a vertebra have a spinal cord and a nervous system like ours. They have their free nerve endings register pain, heat, and cold like ours do. Animals with a vertebra are divided up into 5 groups: mammals, including humans, birds, reptiles, fish, and amphibians. All of these animals feel pain in the same way that we do. Animals feel with emotions. Animals have intelligence. They think things out and make decisions based on their experiences. Entire books have been written documenting cases of animal emotion and intelligence. I could list countless examples of animals using their intelligence or showing their feelings. But I don't need to, since there is clear inspiration proving the truth of it. As we look at the ministry of healing, page 315 to 316, let us remember 3 questions. Number 1, do animals have intelligence? Number 2, do animals experience emotions? And number 3, do animals suffer? The intelligence displayed by many dumb animals approaches so closely to human intelligence that it is a mystery. The animals see and hear and love and fear and suffer. They use their organs far more faithfully than many human beings use theirs. They manifest sympathy and tenderness toward their companions in suffering. Many animals show an affection for those who have charge of them, far superior to the affection shown by some of the human race. They form attachments for many which are not broken without great suffering to them. Animals experience physical suffering, such as pain, heat, and cold, and they experience emotional suffering, such as loss, unhappiness, and terror. Causing suffering to animals is the same as causing suffering to humans. So since we have shown that animals suffer as we do, we can now go back and answer our original question of when we can and when we cannot cause them to suffer. Number 1, discipline. We use a leash to prevent the dogs from chasing the neighbors. We spay and neuter dogs and cats to prevent them from hurting themselves or others. Where domestic birds nest, we put up electric fences to shock any fox out to eat the eggs. Now, my grandfather raised many chickens for both eggs and professional showing. Sometimes his birds got into the very bad habit of egg eating. Now, this is where as soon as an egg was laid, some hens would crack them open and eat out the contents. Now, this couldn't continue, so my grandfather had a solution for this particular problem. He would take a freshly laid egg, and then he would crack open a small piece of it, and then he would insert into the egg the most strong, extra toxic hot sauce that he could get. And then he would put those eggs back out in the coop. And very soon, it was clear which chickens were egg eaters and which were not. The innocent ones looked as they always did, no problem, no issues whatsoever. But the guilty chickens wandered around with a dazed look in their eye, bills hanging open, panting, as they tried to recover from the toxic meal they had just eaten. Very soon, all the chickens were innocent of egg eating. It was a discipline that worked very, very well. Number 2, another allowed case to cause suffering is to save life. Taking animals to a vet terrifies them, but it's often necessary. Repairing a broken leg or surgery may be necessary to save the life of an animal. Giving them medicine or restricting their food is often necessary as well to help them survive. The principles of caring for animals. Now, up until this point, we have looked only at those things in which we can do something to an animal, when we can kill them, when we can cause them to suffer, our actions against animals. But what about our responsibility for them? The merciful provisions of the law extended even to the lower animals, which cannot express in words their want and suffering. Desire of Ages, page 500. Now, we could look at many texts throughout Scripture that promote compassion toward animals, but we're only going to look at the most important one, which is found in Proverbs 12, verse 10. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Now, the first half of this verse is God's dominion, and the second half of this verse is Satan's dominion. Now, all of this is contained in one verse. Mrs. White expands on this. Here is a lesson to all who have reasoning powers, that harsh treatment, even to the brutes, is offensive to God. Those who profess to love God do not always consider that abuse to animals or suffering brought upon them by neglect is a sin. The fruits of divine grace will be as truly revealed in men by the manner in which they treat their beasts as by their service in the house of God. Those who allow themselves to become impatient or enraged with their animals are not Christians. A man who is harsh, severe, and domineering toward the lower animals because he has them in his power is both a coward and a tyrant. If animals could speak, what deeds of horror would be revealed? What tales of suffering because of the perversity of man's temper? How often those creatures of God's care suffer pain, endure hunger and thirst because they cannot make known their wants. And how often is it determined by the mercy or the caprice of man whether they receive attention and kindness or neglect and abuse? Punishment given in passion to an animal is frequently excessive and is then absolute cruelty. Animals have a kind of dignity and self-respect akin to that possessed by human beings. If abused under the influence of blind passion, their spirits will be crushed and they will become nervous, irritable, and ungovernable. Signs of the Time, November 25, 1880. Why do we, as Adventists, promote vegetarianism? Is it only because of our own health? If we think that the only reason to avoid meat is because of our own health, then we are ignoring a large section of Ellen White's writings concerning this. She has as much to say about the cruelty to animals involved as any other single reason. Even if meat was perfectly healthy, which it certainly is not, it would still be wrong because of the cruelty to animals involved. The following are only a few of her many statements. I might fill pages with descriptions of the sights I have seen, the suffering among the animals that are to be used for food. When a sheep in a flock lies down and cannot rise, the others leap over or upon it as they proceed. A large box wagon follows the flock, and I have seen the drivers take up the heavy sheep when unable to travel farther and bounce them into the wagon, right upon their backs. And I have counted no less than 8 sheep, some already dead, and others in the agonies of death, lying by the roadside after the flock had passed. But I will not go on to describe these sickening sights. If I had not, prior to this time, discarded the use of the flesh of dead animals, I should now take the pledge to eat no more meat as long as fruits and vegetables can be obtained. Manuscript Releases, Volume 7, 423. We saw a large herd of cattle in the road ahead of us. Some animals had been wounded. Some were limping along. One poor suffering creature had both horns broken off close to his head, and the blood was flowing from the wound. Some were very lame and were pictures of brute misery. Taken from the green paddocks and traveling for weary miles over the hot, dusty road, these poor creatures are driven to their death, that human beings may feast on their miserable dead carcasses. Your wrong habits of eating have so educated your moral powers that you have not the spirit of a Christian. Your temper is perverse, and your treatment of dumb animals is wrong. Here's a key one. Not an ounce of flesh meat should enter our stomachs. How much? It's too bad Ellen White was not clear upon this subject. She left it vague, didn't she, for people to misunderstand what she was saying. Not an ounce of flesh meat should enter our stomachs. The eating of flesh is unnatural. Let them rather return to the wholesome and delicious food given to man in the beginning, and themselves practice mercy toward the dumb creatures that God has made and has placed under our dominion. Will the people who are seeking to become holy, pure, refined, that they may be introduced into the society of heavenly angels, continue to take the life of God's creatures and enjoy their flesh as a luxury? Many who are now only half converted on the question of meat eating will go from God's people to walk no more with them. Now ask yourself, this is very pointed. Are you only half converted on the question of meat eating? Think about it very carefully. This is a prophecy that I have seen fulfilled exactly in former Adventists who lost their way over this very issue. This is serious. This is real. Think of the cruelty to animals that meat eating involves and its effect on those who inflict and those who behold it. How it destroys the tenderness with which we should regard these creatures of God. Animals are often transported long distances and subjected to great suffering in reaching a market. Taken from the green pastures and traveling for weary miles over the hot, dusty roads, or crowded into filthy cars, feverish and exhausted, often for many hours deprived of food and water. The poor creatures are driven to their death, that human beings may feast on the carcasses. Some animals are inhumanely treated while being brought to the slaughter. They are literally tortured, and after they have endured many hours of extreme suffering, are butchered. All of these passages are from Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 380 to 386. So, the question has often been asked, is it a sin to eat meat? Now, the only way to answer this is to see what the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy have stated. As we have seen, to eat any animal with the blood still in it is totally forbidden. Under no circumstances. It makes no difference if it is clean meat or not. So to eat a chicken or a cow with the blood is as much of a sin as to eat a pig. There's no difference. Ellen White has made it clear that to eat meat when better foods are available is no longer permitted for us in these last days of history. For example, in a country such as this, where there are fruits, grains, and nuts in abundance, how can one think that he must eat the flesh of dead animals? We have plenty of good things to satisfy hunger without bringing corpses upon our table to compose our bill of fare. So to answer the original question, it is a sin to eat meat if better food is available, or if we are eating meat with the blood in it, which is all the meat found in restaurants and on supermarket shelves, unless it is specifically labeled kosher. The Bible and Spirit of Prophecy are very clear about this. Treatment of food animals. Now we get practical. In the century since Mrs. White wrote these very strong statements condemning their use, the way we use animals for food, we have developed a new way of raising animals called factory farming. The animals killed for food today are completely removed from the old McDonald's farm of the past. Factory farming is big business. Whatever is cost-effective is the only consideration. Mass-produced chickens and turkeys are raised in warehouses. As they grow to full size, they become a solid mass of birds with no space to spare. Far overcrowded, they literally rub each other raw. The weaker are trampled to death. Disease spreads like wildfire. Injured and diseased birds are left untreated until they die. Pigs and many cows are kept in closed concrete stalls. They are fed whatever fattens them quickest, not what keeps them healthy. To prevent disease, they receive massive amounts of antibiotics, in the long run making them even unhealthier. Pigs are actually as intelligent as dogs and have complex emotions. A worker in a factory farm each morning found all the pigs sleeping together in a group, as one female had learned how to open the latch on her stall and went around the whole building to release all the other pigs every night so that all could be together. Now, every morning the workers returned the pigs to their individual stalls, but when evening came, the female pig freed her friends again for the night. Now, all farmed animals end up being transported long distances unprotected from the heat or the cold. To save some money, they are not fed or watered on these trips. They are pushed, dragged, prodded, shocked, and beaten. Many fall and break legs or hips or are too sick to move. Now, those are called downers and are left where they lie to die, however long it takes. If the slaughterers get to them before they die, they attach chains to their legs and drag them to the kill floor. If the animals die first, they are used for pet food. God's dominion, or Satan's dominion. Now, most beef cattle and sheep are raised on open rangeland throughout the West. Any animal that remotely competes with them are considered vermin and killed on sight. The ranching industry is directly responsible for the eradication of scores of species. Little prairie dogs have been killed by the billions for no other reason than that they dig burrows and they eat grass. Often prairie dogs are killed by poisons that kill many other animals after the fact. But sporting hunters will set up lawn chairs next to a dog town and shoot everyone who comes out of their hole with a high-powered rifle, scoring points for how badly mangled the dogs get. The rarest mammal in North America, the black-footed ferret, depended on prairie dog towns to survive. As the prairie dog colonies were destroyed, the black-footed ferret became virtually extinct, and now much cost and effort is expended trying to restore them to their previous homes. So now we spend millions of dollars to save and restore what we spent millions of dollars to destroy. For not only do the individual ranchers slaughter the animals privately, the government's secretive rogue agency, Wildlife Services, kills millions of animals a year, mainly to benefit welfare ranching. And how do they kill them? With traps and poisons that kill anything indiscriminately. They corner babies in their dens and gas or burn them to death. All of this bloodshed so that we can butcher the cows ourselves in our meat-addicted culture. And don't be fooled by grass-fed beef or other deceptions. They might be slightly healthier than regular beef, but they are just as cruelly treated before they are butchered. And just as many wild animals are destroyed by these ranchers as well. Ranching always means pointless deaths. We rake the oceans with fishing nets that kill everything in their paths: fish, dolphins, whales, birds. 75% of the world's fisheries are at the maximum level of sustainable fishing. Any increase in the fish killed would cause biological collapse, a chain reaction that leaves nothing left alive. The other 25% of the world's fisheries are already in a state of biological collapse. It's too late for them. There's no getting any of those ecosystems back. And when the fish disappear, we blame other animals, never ourselves. We, the seals, dolphins, and sharks, become our scapegoats, and we wage war upon them. This is a picture of part of a drying roof of a shark fin processing plant found in Asia. Every triangle represents one dead shark, as the only part that is used is the single top fin, the rest being thrown away. Shark numbers are crashing around the world to fulfill luxury meals of shark fin soup. Dolphins and pilot whales are rounded up in Japan and the Faroes and elsewhere and hacked and stabbed to death. They are not killed for food usually, but only because they eat fish. The ocean turns solid red with the blood of these innocent, helpless, intelligent, sensitive creatures. Is the unrelenting nightmare of the fishing industry God's dominion or Satan's dominion? Dairy cows are also confined extensively. Their life is a constant cycle of being impregnated, giving birth, and having their day-old calves taken from them. Now, the bond between mother and calf is as strong in cows as in every other large mammal, as the story of one mother cow in England demonstrates. When she gave birth, the farmer sold the calf to a farm and the mother to a different farm, two totally different places. Now, the next morning, the farmer who had bought the mother discovered that she had broken out of her new stall and had run away. He had no idea where she was. The farmer who had bought the calf came out that morning to discover the calf nursing from its mother. The mother had traveled 7 miles to a farm she had never seen before to find her lost calf. What a wonderful example of motherly love and dedication. Female dairy calves are sent back into the system. They're useful. Males are taken to veal stalls. There they are chained in a 2-foot wide box. They can stand up and lie down. Stand up, lie down. Nothing more. They are fed a nutrient-deficient diet to keep their flesh the right color. They are prevented from exercising to keep their muscles soft. For 6 months, they are purposely kept anemic and sick, all to provide their flesh as a delicacy. For these young calves are children. If we locked a human child in a closet for a year, how healthy would that child be mentally and physically? Every glass of milk, bowl of ice cream, or wedge of cheese symbolically contains a slice of veal. You cannot buy dairy products without supporting the veal industry, because they are not two industries, but one. Female dairy cows are so bloated by growth hormones and milk-producing drugs that their bodies are far too large and easily break down or become infected. They are treated as living machines and are disposed of the same way. In 1899, Ellen White wrote the following: "The light given me is that it will not be very long before we shall have to give up using any animal food. Even milk will have to be discarded." Now note her words, "not be very long," as we find them again in a statement made 3 years later. Animals are becoming more and more diseased, and it will not be long until animal food will be discarded by many besides Seventh-day Adventists. Has this prophecy come true? Many people besides Adventists have stopped eating animals for many reasons. If this prophecy has been fulfilled, shouldn't the message from God given 3 years earlier also have come true? Again, it will not be very long before we, Adventists, shall have to give up using any animal food. Has that time come, or will we continue to play games with inspiration and God's will? The recent ongoing Adventist health study reports that 8% of Adventist respondents are vegan. 8% is not nearly high enough. It's just not. Disease has grown so rampant that even raising these animals is dangerous to our health. A century ago, Ellen White warned that there will soon be no safety in the possession of flocks or herds. 75 years ago, my grandfather was a dairy farmer and an Adventist. But to still be an Adventist rancher or dairy farmer today is to ignore God's will. Now, I used to believe that since I ate no meat, that therefore I was free from causing cruelty. But in those days, I still ate eggs from the store and was dismayed to learn how laying eggs hens are treated. In cages 2 feet square, up to 9 full-sized hens are jammed. They cannot spread a single wing. Their feathers are rubbed off, and soon they have open sores. In such crowds, cannibalism becomes common. So every hen has her beak sliced off to cause her intense pain whenever she pecks at another bird. Now, of course, all the male chicks are useless to the industry and are immediately killed by the millions. The ammonia buildup in the warehouses from the chickens' droppings is so bad that workers must wear masks when they enter, but the hens are forced to breathe it 24 hours a day. Wire floors are not good for chicken feet, and often their growing toenails become enmeshed in the wire and they never free them again. If they are near the food, they survive. Come slaughter time, when their egg-laying rate slows, they are so violently removed from their cages that often feet and partial legs can be found in the empty cages, still attached to the wire floor. If you want to know what it's like to be an egg-laying hen, try this test. Get in a normal-sized car in a closed garage and bring 7 or 8 other people with you. After everyone has squeezed in, lock the doors and never leave again for the next 2 years until you are removed to be killed. That's the life of a battery hen today in our society. I have a simple equation that I now use whenever I'm tempted to have an egg. 1 egg equals 22 hours. 22 hours is the average time between each egg laid by a battery hen in our system. 22 hours of absolute, unrelenting misery of an innocent, helpless, suffering creation of God. 1 hard-boiled egg, 22 hours. A couple fried, 44. A large quiche or an omelet is worth days of suffering, all contained on 1 plate. God's dominion, or Satan's dominion. And be wary of cage-free labels. That usually just means the hens are kept in a dark shed with all the same overcrowding and ammonia buildups of regular farms. Standards are loose and deception is common. A tiny outdoor extension qualifies as free range. It rarely means a grassy yard. Don't forget the standard procedure of cutting off their beaks and forced molting to maintain egg-laying rates. What about the older hens who lay less? They usually are sent to slaughter like all the rest. And even if the hens are well treated, what about the useless males? They are destroyed without mercy. Cage-free does not mean cruelty-free. A backyard flock allowed to live out their normal lifespan is about the only way to truly avoid chicken cruelty. Everything else is a marketing ploy. Sport hunting and fishing. Now, for thousands of years, much of people's food has been obtained by hunting and fishing. But with modern farming, hunting is now mainly for sport. There are no stronger indictment of the way we treat animals than that we kill them purely for fun and entertainment. Ellen White in Desire of Ages, page 356 to 357. Satan's hatred against God leads him to hate every object of the Savior's care. He seeks to mar the handiwork of God, and he delights in destroying even the dumb creatures. A better definition of sport hunting and fishing could not be written. Hundreds of millions destroyed every year in the U.S. alone, all for trophies and bragging rights. Safaris that kill one of every different species to have each variety of horns. Now, an Adventist photographer friend of ours was traveling through Africa when he witnessed a trophy hunt of an elephant, one of the most intelligent and sensitive animals that God placed on earth, killed to supply a great white hunter with a head on a wall. To make it more fun, many hunters use as inefficient a weapon as possible. Bow and arrow users lose half the deer they shoot. Those that escape end up dying by themselves from blood loss, infection, or from the arrow penetrating deeper to a vital organ. State wildlife agencies build up game species for hunters at the expense of all other wildlife. North American hunters cause an average of 1,100 human injuries per year and around 100 human deaths per year. Human beings are dying due to the bloodlust of hunters far more than from wild animals. In fact, all North American human deaths by wild animals only averages a third of hunter-caused deaths. A rich dentist with a rifle is a far greater threat to your life than any bear, cougar, shark, or snake. And then there's sport fishing, which is merely hunting for fish. Now remember, fish are vertebrates with a nervous system that feels pain like ours do. They don't show it like other animals because we can't hear the sounds that they make without special equipment. But fish have the same social lives and emotional feelings as all other vertebrates do. In South Africa, an aquarium had an Aranda goldfish named Big Red. Now, into Big Red's tank was put a severely deformed moor goldfish named Blackie. Now, Blackie could barely swim or move around the tank. He had been that way from birth. From the start, Big Red sensed Blackie's helplessness and took it upon himself to be Blackie's friend. Big Red would pick Blackie up on his back and help him around the tank to get wherever they needed to go. When the food was sprinkled onto the surface, Big Red carried Blackie up to the surface so that they both could feed together. At the time that this story was reported, this had been going on for over a year. A year. This is altruism. The giving to others with no thought of reward, being shown from a small fish on a continuing basis. But no regard is ever given to fish, and the worst tortures are heaped upon them so that we can relax and enjoy the outdoors. The fish hooks we use rip into their mouths with all the intensity that a nail would feel in our mouths. They use their mouth to examine their surroundings since they have no hands or paws. Often hooked fish lose their ability to eat until the gaping wound heals. Fish lose their protective coat of mucus by being handled by humans. Without it, they are susceptible to bacteria and waterlogged tissues, both of which can be fatal. Many fish are so exhausted from fighting the fisherman's line that when released, they go into shock for hours and are easily caught by predators. Various studies have found that a hooked fish removed from the water for only 60 seconds and then replaced back into the water, still alive, has a 43 to 72% mortality rate. 43 to 72% of those fish will die very, very quickly after being taken out in this way. No one can tell me it is more humane to catch and release when you have that high a mortality rate amongst the ones being released. That's like saying that a mugger is humane for not killing his victim if he only beats the victim senseless. That must make the mugger a true sportsman. Those not thrown back slowly die by drowning in air. Sometimes it takes well over an hour. I have watched fish being skinned alive as they struggled. Our casual acceptance of cruelty to fish because they look and act differently from other animals is based largely on our emotional attachments to animals that seem more like us. Now, when our pleasure causes others pain, we fit the description of the pre-flood inhabitants in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 92. They delighted in destroying the life of animals, and the use of flesh for food rendered them still more cruel and bloodthirsty, until they came to regard human life with astonishing indifference. Now, please understand that what I'm talking about here tonight is not part of a political agenda or the regular environmental issues which are often discussed in our society. Many meat-eating, hunting, fishing environmentalists would be very disturbed and upset by the subjects that I'm talking about here tonight. We must examine each of our practices with animals to see whether or not we are following God's dominion or Satan's dominion, and take steps to change things if wrong is being done. Mrs. White had much to say about the North's responsibility for the Civil War. Testimonies, Volume 1, page 359. God is punishing the North that they have so long suffered the accursed sin of slavery to exist. Now, the North did not have slaves at the time of the war, but they allowed slavery to continue to exist and were punished accordingly. God holds us responsible if we allow wrong to continue by our silence and apathy. To say it's not our problem is to shirk our God-given duty. Now we're just going to look at a couple more sections just to kind of fill out the big picture here of what is going on to the animal world. Animals we wear. Mammals used for fur are killed in two ways. First are those which are found on farms, such as mink, foxes, chinchillas, even dogs and cats. They spend their short, miserable lives crowded into wire cages, unprotected from the weather, until they are killed by electrocution, strychnine, gas, or having their necks broken. Second are those caught in the wild with leg-hold traps. Traps catch anything that touches them: pet dogs and cats, songbirds, deer. For every fur animal caught in a trap, two so-called trash animals are also caught and killed by the trap and thrown away. Animals caught remain for hours or days until the trapper returns. Some chew off their leg and bleed to death elsewhere. The returning trapper does not want to damage the pelt, so they club, crush, or stomp the trapped animals to death. Around the world, most cat species are now endangered due to the fur industry. Seals and kangaroos are slaughtered endlessly. All of this bloodshed for luxury coats, fur-lined gloves, knickknacks, and trivial souvenirs. Sales of jacket trim are one of the main reasons the fur industry survives, because people think that just a little fur is okay. Alligator shoes, snakeskin belts, bearskin rugs, ostrich skin wallets, and other forms of exotic leather also represent massive cruelty. 40 million fur bearers, plus uncountable non-target trash animals, killed worldwide every year for nothing at all but fashion and appearance. God's dominion or Satan's dominion. Our companion animals. We lavish millions of dollars on our pets, give them the best of attention and love, until we grow tired of them. If they become inconvenient or too expensive, then we dispose of them. Some people set them free in campgrounds, rest areas, in forests or towns. Hardly any of these survive. Most die from disease, starvation, or being hit by cars. Those that live eke out a slim, unhappy living. For every human born in this country, 7 dogs and cats are born, and there is nowhere for them to go. Now, that is a huge improvement on conditions of just a few decades ago, when too many people let their pets breed indiscriminately. But pounds are still killing 2 to 3 million abandoned dogs and cats every year. Their deaths occur when we do not spay and neuter our pets, and because we allow animal breeding puppy mills to continue to exist. Are we fulfilling our God-given duty of stewardship toward our most loyal friends? And there are many wild animals made into pets who would just as soon not be. Reptiles and parrots and fish can be treated humanely, but still be unhappy. Stuck in small tanks or cages with nothing interesting to do, they are far removed from their wild homes. In fact, most tropical fish are captured for the pet trade using cyanide. This kills many non-target fish outright and poisons their coral reef homes. So, with so many dogs and cats and other domestic animals dying for a lack of a home, do we really need to take healthy animals from their God-given homes in the wild? Experimenting on animals for science. Now, in the past, it was taught that the best way to learn about human anatomy and the theory of evolution was to dissect non-human animals. But modern alternatives have made dissection obsolete. Because of dissection, many wild populations of frogs, sharks, salamanders, reptiles, fish, and birds have been slaughtered. We must not devalue life by killing just because it's convenient. Dissection is literally a dead-end education. We should teach the most important lesson of all, the respect for life. One area we need to examine is whether we can cause animal suffering in order to save human life. This is very important. We need to examine this. It needs careful thought. Is experimentation on animals a justified practice? First, we need to note that we experiment all the time on human beings to test new products. They are called clinical tests, and they involve only volunteers. We must always remember that animals in tests are never volunteers. They have no choice. So we must strive very hard to limit such tests to only the absolutely crucial. We cannot cause their suffering for trivial, repetitive, or pointless tests. We must evaluate animal research on a case-by-case basis to determine its worth. One major area of animal research is cosmetic testing. Dozens of rabbits per test are enclosed in metal boxes with only their heads protruding. Then various substances are poured into their eyes to see how much damage is done. Go into your bathroom or your laundry and look for any product that has not been tested in this way. Unless you have been carefully buying humane products, you will be disappointed. Bleach, hairspray, shampoo, mascara, and detergent are all being used to blind rabbits in pointless tests. The companies that continue these tests say that it is for public safety and because the tests are required by law. That is a lie. No law requires it, and hundreds of companies that never test on animals prove it. Results of cosmetic tests are only valid on the animal species they were performed on. To help human beings, tests would need to show the exact amount of the substance required to injure a human, which these tests never show. Every time we buy a product from a company that tests on animals, we are saying to them, it's all right to do this. You don't need to change. Here's some more money to blind rabbits. We are making it possible for suffering to continue by our buying choices. Modern alternative tests that do not use animals and are as accurate or better than animal tests are readily available, but companies will not switch until we force them to by our wallets. The second area I'll mention is drug testing. Is it helpful to test drugs and chemicals on animals to make sure that they are safe for us? A government study was conducted on every new drug marketed over a period of 10 years. The study found that half of the drugs were relabeled during that period or withdrawn entirely because they were found to be more dangerous on people than animal tests had shown them to be. Now, this is an example. A pesticide that was proven safe using animal tests was DDT. But the overwhelming evidence of decades proved how lethal DDT is to the animals and the entire food web. Animal research can often be used as a wax nose to prove whatever the researchers want them to prove. Government agencies using animal tests have been proving for decades that cigarettes are addictive and harmful. But at the same time, tobacco-run animal tests have been proving for years that cigarettes are not addictive or harmful. Many such tests prove whatever the researchers want them to prove. We need to understand that animal research is a faulty method of gathering information that actually costs human life, since each animal species reacts differently to various tests. An example of this is about 50 years ago, scientists thought they might have a really promising drug from an extract from the Pacific yew tree in treating cancer. So they infected healthy animals with cancer and then used the extract to treat them. No result occurred. No improvement. It didn't work. The scientists decided the extract was useless and abandoned it completely. Now, Pacific yew is a small, scraggly, understory tree that only grows in the Pacific Northwest from Oregon up through British Columbia. Now, lumbermen dislike it because it is a worthless tree for timber. It's too small and straggly, and they usually cut and burn it when they cut down the other trees that they're actually wanting. Here is a photo of a yew tree that started growing in 1885, and we took this like 15 years ago, so that's over a century's worth of growth. It's a very small tree. It doesn't grow fast or very far. Eventually, scientists decided to try again. They really thought something was going on with this extract. It should work. So let's try it again. And so the results this time were shocking, because this time they used only clinical tests instead of animals. The extract was extremely effective on certain cancers. In fact, it was the most promising treatment to be found in ages. But now there was a serious problem. For decades, lumbermen had been wastefully destroying yews as a trash tree, irrelevant. It was hard to find enough trees to provide the extract for patient treatment. So two drastic consequences resulted from our faith in animal testing. First, a real treatment of cancer patients was delayed for decades. Secondly, for all that time, the main source of the treatment was allowed to be foolishly destroyed instead of being utilized to help people. How many other life-saving drugs have been lost to us in this way? In this yew case, our reliance upon animal tests has actually cost human life. We must ask ourselves if animal testing, it truly saves human life, and if not, then why is it allowed to continue? Reforming our attitudes toward animals. We need a new perception of the animal world from that which we have inherited. We lavish attention, time, and money on our cats and dogs. Pets are wonderful. Everyone loves kitties and puppies. But beyond them, things change. Cows and chickens are for eating. That's what God made them for. Ducks and moose are here to be hunted. The only possible purpose of a fish is to be impaled upon a hook. All predators are pure evil and must be eradicated. The only good snake is a dead snake. We think animals are beautiful in pictures and nature films, but let them do anything that causes us the slightest inconvenience, and the first solution proposed is to kill them. We marvel at the colors of a butterfly and unthinkingly squash every moth we can find, when in reality moths are virtually identical to butterflies. For woe unto any animal that doesn't meet with our standard of beauty. Everyone knows all about bats and spiders, octopus and snakes. They are ugly, so they must be bad. The reality is that most people know next to nothing about such animals, and what they do know is often 95% nonsense. Test yourself, true or false. Bats fly into people's hair and suck blood from your neck. Tarantulas swarm onto people, biting them to death. Snakes leap out of trees to strangle people as they pass by. Octopus pulls swimmers down to their death in the bottom of the ocean. Of course, all of the answers are, of course, false, as are hundreds of other stories that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Stories created hundreds of years ago to scare people are passed on as gospel truth from generation to generation. Until we throw away the myths, we will never appreciate animals for what and who they really are. Living, breathing, feeling creations of God, with their own lives and purposes in God's plan. We may not understand that purpose, and it may in fact have nothing directly to do with us, but that in no way negates the importance of it. As an illustration of our thoughtlessness in caring for the animal creation entrusted to our dominion, we only need to look to the thousands of animal species currently threatened with extinction. Now, we know of hundreds of species that have been destroyed already by human activity. We have no idea how many more are being lost before we even know they exist. And once they're gone, we can never get them back, no matter how much we may want to. Are there any solutions? This is obviously what I've been describing being done to the animals is terrible. It's depressing. It's overwhelming. But what can we do about it? Now, I'm not asking you to go out and start picketing McDonald's. I'm not asking you to join every animal protection group out there. What I am asking is that we all examine our own lives to ensure that we eliminate our support of cruelty in any form that it takes, that we have an impact on. We often feel helpless to stop wrongs being done, but we actually have more influence than we realize. In this presentation, I have very carefully chosen only those issues that in this country we can alter by our actions. There are 3 steps that we can all take to save the lives of animals. Number 1, never directly cause an animal to die. Hunting and fishing are obvious, but just as deadly are meat and fur. Every time we buy any fur or ivory or meat, we directly cause animals to die. Don't kill that snake. It's not out to get you. There is never any justification to ever kill any non-venomous snake in North America. And only in the most unusual and extreme cases should the venomous ones be killed. They are vitally important to the ecosystem and only use their venom for 2 reasons: to catch their food and to defend themselves. Leave them alone, and they will leave you alone. Find non-lethal solutions to animals in your yard that annoy you. Whole books are available detailing how to deal with backyard animals humanely. Death should never be the first option. Number 2, never indirectly cause an animal to die. By buying milk and eggs, cosmetics and toothpastes tested on animals, or animals from a pet store, we allow and fund the suffering and death of animals to continue. When we visit places like marine parks and rodeos that exploit and abuse animals, we make it profitable for them to exist. Most animal abuse exists only because it is profitable. When people stop giving money to the abusers, the suffering and death stops. And don't say that you're only one person and can't have any impact upon the big picture. A vegetarian saves the lives of hundreds of animals by his food choices. As with spreading the gospel, our task is to help save the individual we have influence upon, not to look at the unsaved billions and give up. Number 3, educate yourself and others of what is going on. Tell your family and friends what you've learned here. Express how much these things bother you. Laboratory experimentation we as individuals can make a difference if we will only make the effort. It is our duty and responsibility as God's caretakers of His creation. And victories are being won every day. Since I first started researching this subject decades ago, huge improvements have been made in many areas. Far fewer pets are killed in pounds now than there were before. Thanks to the efforts of dedicated activists, rogue Japanese pirates are slaughtering fewer whales around the world. Students now have real alternatives to dissection that they can choose, and chimpanzees are finally being removed from laboratory prisons. Substitutes are easily available for every meat and dairy product. Many countries are banning cosmetic testing entirely. Scientific books have been written proving that fish feel pain. Rattlesnake roundups are being phased out. They're not gone entirely, but most of them have already been destroyed completely, and there's just a few left. And some animals in factory farms are being given more room. All of these victories only happened because enough people finally demanded change by their voice and by their buying choices. We are not faced with the false choice of helping animals or people, since helping one usually helps both. Change never happens without a struggle, but it is happening. Envoy. As long as we allow or participate in practices that hurt animals, we will forever come short of Christ's admonition in Matthew 5:48. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. We cannot have the character of God when we are tainted with cruelty. We as followers of Christ are to be an example to the world and universe of His law working in His people's lives. When we fulfill the dominion principle, we will have taken one more step toward that goal. In this presentation, I've shown our responsibility to the animal world and our complete mishandling of what was been entrusted to us. I very much condensed what could have been said, as books have been written on virtually every subject I have mentioned. But it can be summed up further yet in one brief passage by Ellen White. Everything I've talked about today is embraced in this one passage. It is found in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 442 to 443, after Balaam had beaten his donkey. Balaam had given evidence of the spirit that controlled him by his treatment of his beast. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Few realize, as they should, the sinfulness of abusing animals or leaving them to suffer from neglect. He who created man made the lower animals also, and his tender mercies are over all his works. The animals were created to serve man, but he has no right to cause them pain by harsh treatment or cruel exaction. It is because of man's sin that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth together. Suffering and death thus were entailed, not only upon the human race, but upon the animals. Surely then it becomes man to seek to lighten, instead of increasing, the weight of suffering which his transgression has brought upon God's creatures. He who will abuse animals because he has them in his power is both a coward and a tyrant. A disposition to cause pain, whether to our fellow men or to the brute creation, is satanic. Many do not realize that their cruelty will ever be known because the poor dumb animals cannot reveal it. But could the eyes of these men be opened, as were those of Balaam, they would see an angel of God standing as a witness to testify against them in the courts above. A record goes up to heaven, and a day is coming when judgment will be pronounced against those who abuse God's creatures. I can add nothing to that but to ask that we please allow that day to come quickly. For the animals' lives and the vindication of God's character are in our hands. Let us remember the words in Isaiah 11, verse 9. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. Now, this has not been a fun presentation like the last 2 years. This is not about having fun pictures of cute animals doing amazing things. This is about practical godliness. And so here's some resources, just so you can get something to kind of get you started. Here is a list of various websites which list those companies which do not test on animals. And there's various different ways to do this. You can have a full list of those that do and those that do not test on animals. They're constantly being updated by the various groups as more companies change and become non-testing, or a few break their promises and become testing again. So it's always being altered. There's also an app that I use that you can find in your app store for Google or for Samsung or for Apple. And you go into your app store and type in cruelty-free, and you'll get a whole bunch of different apps which you can use to actually go to a store, scan a barcode on a product, and it will tell you whether or not that product has been tested on animals or not. Very quick and easy. And so it's a very useful way to go shopping and pick out those things which aren't the cause of cruelty. So those are some easy ways to do so. Now for resources, we're going to be giving you a copy of my book. Now the book basically covers everything that was in this sermon just now, but it also covers a lot more. It is much longer than what I presented. Basically, with this sermon is the front half of the book, and the second half goes into a lot of the gray areas. What about insect pests? What about zoos? What about some of the gray areas in terms of how we deal with animals? And so we're giving you a free copy of that book to be able to use, so make sure you pick that up. There's actually 2 different versions of that book, and let me just get onto that. There we go. This is the Adventist version of the book. This is what we're going to be giving to you right now. It is the expanded version that includes all the Ellen White passages that I've been quoting from and that sort of thing. So this is the best version to get. However, I also wrote in 2004 a much smaller version which was designed for non-Adventists. And so this one doesn't have all the Ellen White quotes, and it's much slimmer, and it has it doesn't have the appendixes of the gray areas. So if you would have a use for that, if that would be something that you can want for a friend or relative who doesn't know anything about Ellen White and wouldn't be impressed by her in this book, ask me for that. I only give out that to people who ask for it because I have a limited supply of those. This is the one you want unless you have a specific need for that particular thing. This is our website. I've shown you that earlier tonight. I'm not going to go into that again. On the table out there, you are going to see a bunch of leaflets in a section separated from our main sales table. And all of those leaflets are a free gift to you to be able to use and share with others. They cover a bunch of what I've talked about here tonight. They're from various different groups, and I'm not trying to promote any individual group. I've just picked up leaflets that I liked from various places, and so I'm not trying to push individual groups out there. You can choose whatever group you like or don't like, I don't care. But this is just about some of the issues that we've talked about, plus some issues that we haven't talked about. So go make sure and you see the leaflets, because all of those are free to to use as well. So take a look at that before you take off. Now I'm going to just give a brief showing of what we have available, just to give you an idea again of what our materials are. This one right here is what we did 2 years ago. It is called the Divine Watchmaker versus the Blind Watchmaker. This is actually a brand new version of it that we've completely done from scratch. So this is actually a brand new fancy version of the older program that we have phased out, but it covers what we did 2 years ago. This is what we did last year on the God's Miracles, Little Known Miracles of God's Creation. It included that little narrow-mouthed toad section amongst many other animals, showing the really unusual gifts God has given to them. These are the kids programs that we have available. We have 4 different kids programs, including the weird and wonderful creatures of creation, the really strange shapes and forms God gave to animals, and God's wild animals. This is our brand new presentation. We just finished it 2 months ago, and so this is our newest one. basically dealing with those wild animals that are related to the domestic animals we're familiar with. We're familiar with cats and dogs and horses and sheep and cows and pigs and all that sort of thing. Are we familiar with all the different wild versions that God made that live out there in nature on their own without any help from us? And so that's our newest one, dealing with really some of the fun animals related to our friends, the domesticated animals. We have specific ones on very unusual topics. Without this animal, you will die. Are you aware that there are animals that God has made that if they weren't doing the jobs they're doing, you would drop dead in a few months? What are those animals and what are the jobs that they're doing? Animals and their God-given gift for architecture. When the animals build homes for themselves or their young, when they build structures, they are actually refuting evolution. And if we had nothing else out there, this one subject of animal architecture would completely destroy the theory of evolution. The predators, red in tooth and claw. Who created the predators? We've looked at a lot of predators tonight in tonight's program. Where did they come from? Because they weren't in the Eden and they're not going to be in the new earth. They changed at the time of sin. How did they change? Who made that change? We also have this very special set of 4 discs dealing with 24 short format spotlights on creation. Just like Mission Spotlight, these are spotlights on creation that you can use for homeschool, for church, for Sabbath School, anything you want, because they're short formats, 10 to 15 minutes on various different subjects going into some aspect of creation science. One of our newer ones is God's Wonder Down Under. Those animals that are found on the other side of the planet are some of the most amazing animals God has ever made. The animals of Australia and New Zealand, one of our fanciest ones we've put together. And then this is what you have seen tonight. This is the video version, exactly like the sermon we just did. And again, the book that we'll be giving you is our free gift to you. All of my dad's materials are still available from before his book, and other materials that he did last 2 years are still available in printed format, as well as DVDs and CDs. And so all of these are basically different versions of what he has done in the last 2 years as well as this year. All of what he has done is available on DVD and CD, including all of today's programs. So if you want to support our ministry, we're not asking for a donation plate offering to be taken up. What we are asking is you go take a look at our materials and find something you like, because all of the materials out there go to support our ministry. Everything on the table goes to keep us going. That's how we go from church to church and put food on the table and gas in the tank. And so we thank you so much for taking a look, because that's what we want you to do, not just to give us money, but to get something in return that you can study and share with your friends and family and go deeper into. We want you to have something in your hands. And so make sure you take a look at the leaflets and various different things. And if you don't find anything you like, take a look at my wife's artwork, because she has painted pictures of animals upon rocks, and those we give out for donations for people who want to support us in that way. We thank you very much for coming out to this last meeting of the day. And now as we close, I'm going to break with prayer for Sabbath, and then we will dismiss for the evening. Father in heaven, we've looked at the natural world. We've looked at your animals that you created, and we've seen the ways that we've mishandled their treatment. Help us to take what we have learned and internalize it and share it with those around us, so that we can be a shining representative of your way, of no destruction of anything that we have in our control. And help us to be able to bring your second coming one step closer by reflecting your character in everything we do and say and think. In Jesus' name, amen. I'll be out there at the table if anybody has any questions.